We are going to learn about the first view, $V session now. When an user logs in via, say, SQL Developer or SQL Plus or some other mechanism, a connection is created with the Oracle server. Using this connection, an user can submit one or more queries to Oracle. This connection is called a session. Note the word I have told, one or more queries. User just establishes one session but can submit as many queries as he wants as long as the session has not expired. The view $V session has details about the various sessions that have been established with the Oracle server. Note, it has all the connections to the Oracle server. That is, if both you and your friend have logged into the database, it will have one row for each of your session. It is important to know that $V session only has those sessions that have not expired. If an user had logged into Oracle in the past and logged out of the session, the $V session view will not have a row to represent that session. There are a total of 80 columns in the view. The ones that you see on the screen are the major columns in this view. Now I'm logging in. I'm logging in to the DB as test user using SQL Developer. As you can see here, I'm selecting from $V session. You might wonder, I have just opened one connection, that is one session. Then why are there so many rows here? Look at the schema names here. For most of the rows, the schema name says sys. All these sys connections are opened by the database itself to do some actions. Remember, I told you Oracle has many processes. So all these processes open a session with Oracle, and that's what shows up here. Note that these ones do not have any username. Look at this one. This is the connection we opened. And you can see this one has the username test. This is the one we used, remember? So what I have done now, I have filtered to just get the record names with username not null. So this will filter out all the sessions opened by the database. We will look at the important columns one by one. SID. This is the unique identifier for the session. So whenever I say SID 47, it refers to the session that was opened by me just now. Important point to note here, this is unique only at a given point in time. If my session disconnects or if I close my session, this row from $V session will disappear. So if a new session opens up, maybe for some other user or maybe for me, a new session can get the same ID. This tells the username we used. We used test, right? The status of the session tells the current status of it. Is it active or is it waiting for something? We will see the other columns later. Now I'm starting an SQL Plus session. Previously I had started a SQL Developer. Now I'm starting a new SQL Plus session. Look at this. As soon as we started an SQL Plus session, you see a new row in the view. You can see the SID is 48. Look at the status. It is inactive. Why? This is the new SQL Plus session we opened. It's inactive because right at this moment, the SQL Plus session is not executing any query. It is idle. That's why it shows up as inactive here. This SQL developer session shows active because right at this moment, we are running this query. Select star from $$ session where username is not null. SID 47 has program SQL developer. This tells the program we have used to connect to Oracle. We have used SQL developer, so it shows SQL developer. Whereas 48 has SQL plus. This represents the SQL plus session that we just opened. We used test as the username for both the sessions. That's why they show up as test here. Look at this. This is an important column. SQL ID is the unique identifier for a query. It represents the SQL that is being executed at present by the session, or the SQL that has just completed. Every SQL that runs in the database will have an unique ID called as SQL ID. For SQL developer session, this is the value it has now. This SQL ID represents this query because this is the query the SQL developer is running right now. Correct? For the SQL plus session, SQL ID is null. Why? Because the SQL plus is not doing anything. It is not executing any query at present. So it has a null. Now I'm going to run a query from the SQL plus session. See here, this is the query we are running from the SQL plus session. We can see that there is a table called all objects BKP. This is a table that I just created for demonstration purposes, and it has approximately around 18,000 rows. Okay, what I did is I took all the rows from the all objects table and then inserted into all objects BKP. I created a table of my own, all objects BKP. Okay, here in this query I have Cartesian joined all objects BKP with itself, as you can see here, without any join condition. Why? I just wanted to make the query run for some considerable amount of time so that we can monitor what is happening with the $$ session view. This is how your $$ session looked like before the query started execution. And this is how the $$ session looks like right now after I have started the query. Note that the query still has not completed the execution. It's still running. Look here. The SQL ID was not having a value before. Now it has a value. This represents the all objects backup query that we just ran from the SQL plus session. The SQL exec start also has a value now. This is the time when the query started executing. Okay. Now the query in SQL plus has completed the execution. The query has completed. Look at this now. The SQL exec chart is again back to null. This tells that the query has completed. You can see, even though the query has completed execution, the SQL ID still remains the same. It is not reset back to null. It is debatable whether it is right or wrong, but that's how it works. Look at this now. Your previous SQL ID is also changed. Once the query completes, the SQL ID is copied into the previous SQL ID. Let us run the same query again from the SQL Plus session. The SQL exec start is updated with the new start time value again, as you can see here. But the SQL ID is not updated. Why? Because it is exactly the same query that runs now. So the SQL ID has not changed. Remember, it is the unique ID for the queries in the database. As you are running the same query again, it reuses the same SQL ID. You also have another column called logon time that can be used to know the session's login time.